Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. As a Hamas delegation waits in Cairo, reports that Israel is staying away from ceasefire talks amid wrangling over hostage details. China says it stands ready to promote peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine during talks in Moscow. Economy in the spotlight. China's top political advisory body speaks to the media a day ahead of its annual session. And Shehbaz Sharif is sworn in as Pakistan's Prime Minister for a second time after last month's controversial election. There are reports that Israel has delayed sending a delegation to Cairo for peace talks. Hopes have been growing for a ceasefire in Gaza, with both sides expected to meet in the Egyptian capital on Sunday. The Times of Israel, though, quotes an official saying that Hamas has refused to supply a name list of living hostages. The United States says a framework is in place for a 6-week pause in fighting that would allow further Israeli hostages to be released. It comes as the United Nations warns that famine in Gaza is almost inevitable unless the current situation changes. Our correspondent Adel Al-Marouhi is in Cairo, where the truce talks had been expected to start today.
Well, the talks seems to be proceeding anyhow, whether this will include Israel delegation or not, because in previous rounds, there has been lots of talks being held by Egypt, Qatar, the USA, along with Palestinian officials and representatives from Hamas, without Israel necessarily taking participation in it. Because basically this is a push by these 3 countries, Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, to push for another round of ceasefire. So they will keep on their mediation efforts, at least to coordinate the status between them and see how they can push forward a successful deal this time. It is still not clear if that means that Israel's delegation will not join at all. We're still waiting to see, will Hamas comply with Israel's demand and responding with exact numbers and status of the refugee, the detainees or hostages they have there in Gaza. This is one of the key issues that Israel says has not sent its delegation because Hamas did not respond in that line.
And Adele, what is Egypt and the other regional states seeking from these talks?
Well, there has been a long effort since the first ceasefire was broken a couple of months ago, that Egypt and other countries, specifically Jordan and many supportive countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar as well, to push for another round of ceasefire. This is the purpose of which is to push for a massive humanitarian aid and support to the Palestinians, who have now lived in dire conditions with basic services have all been completely destroyed, and their foundation as well. And now this comes just 1 week before the holy month, the Muslims' holy month of Ramadan begins. It is expected to begin next Monday. And this is where fasting, Muslims fast all day long. And basically in terms of necessities, it's where the consumption of food just in 1 month triples than the regular average all year long. And therefore, it means that Palestinians in Gaza will be needing way more than what they're getting their hands on from the limited flow of aid, whether it comes from Egypt or from Israel. And the hopes here is that they can manage to broker another ceasefire agreement before the holy month begins and give some sort of an alleviation of the conditions to the Palestinians, at least while they're fasting, because Muslims take Ramadan quite seriously, and most Muslims will be fasting, especially those in Palestine as well. And therefore, it comes in line with the United States' efforts as well, trying as well to push forward for another ceasefire before Ramadan. So this is a general and global consensus about the efforts. But whether will Hamas and Israel help them out to reach that agreement or not, this is what we will be seeing in the next few days.
Adel Al-Marouhi in Cairo. Associated Press correspondent David Biller is in Jerusalem with the latest on whether Israel will attend these peace talks or not.
So far, the answer is no. We've heard from an Israeli official that Israel decided not to send a delegation as you said, because they have not received an answer to two questions. Netanyahu gave up one of them yesterday in a press conference, said he wanted a list of the hostages who remain alive. There are believed to be about 100 still alive in Gaza. The other question, Israeli media has reported it would be the number of Palestinian prisoners to exchange for the number of the Israeli hostages. The deal that had been on the table last week, the rough outline of it anyway, was about 40 or up to 40 Israeli hostages for up to 300 Palestinian prisoners. But we really haven't seen much movement on that in the past week in terms of concrete signs that something is going to happen. The fact that Israel didn't send someone doesn't mean that a deal won't happen. That's, we've heard from a U.S. official, U.S. is helping mediate, that that the ball is now in Hamas's court and that Israel has signed on to the broad outlines of a deal. And we heard from an Egyptian official last night that really they expect a response from Hamas either today or tomorrow.
And David, where does this leave the government of Benjamin Netanyahu? There are growing calls for early elections in Israel.
Right, we saw protests yesterday in Jerusalem. This was actually the culmination of a 4-day march by hostages' families. It started in southern Israel, in one of the areas that was one of the worst sites of violence, more than 300 people killed there. They marched from there. There were only, 100, maybe a little more than that down there. They were waving flags and, playing music. But upon arriving in Jerusalem yesterday, they were joined by thousands, reportedly between 10 and 15,000, including the opposition leader. And really, this puts more pressure on the government. But we don't know, if this will go anywhere. I would just mention that even if there is a ceasefire deal, Netanyahu has said that it would only delay a ground invasion into the southernmost city of Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians are currently located, many of them sheltering in tents. He said that Israel has no choice but to go in there, and so we need to see what actually comes from the ceasefire, but that is what his government is planning.
David Biller in Jerusalem. Well, let's get the latest now from southern Gaza and our correspondent there, Akram Al-Satari in Rafah.
Apparently, the Israeli army is planning some expansion of the military ground operations in Khan Yunis to include new areas that were targeted in the past from the artillery fire and from the unmanned drones and from the fire jets or war jets, but they were not targeted by ground operation. Yesterday night, they were targeting those areas. Hamad area, Al-Sadr al-Gharbi area, and also some parts of Khan Yunis refugee camp areas that were not targeted by the ground operations. Yesterday were subjected to heavy bombardment, what is called fire belts around the whole area. The ground of the troops were advancing into the area, the tanks were advancing, and up to this particular moment, the troops are still deployed in that area, and they seem to have a heavy and comprehensive work on top of the ground, on the surface and under the ground. They have excavators. They have been asking people who are living in Hamad area, which is a Qatari-funded city that was built in 2017. They were asking them to stay in their homes, and after that they were asking people to leave, and they're setting up inspection gates and inspecting the people who were leaving or trying to leave Hamad to escape the ongoing bombardment that affected almost the entire city that accommodates around 5,000 to 7,000 Palestinians and some significant number of the IDPs, internally displaced people who are staying in that area. In Rafah, in Deir al-Balah as well, there were around 40 aerial strikes in around 1 hour or so, and the bombardment is still continuous. That seems as a ground operation being expanded into areas in Rafah and in Khan Yunis, and that seems an attempt by Israel also to continue its ground operation in Khan Yunis.
And there are many reports now of hunger and dehydration. The United States saying that it will continue dropping aid by airdrops. But will it have much of an impact on the situation, particularly in northern Gaza, where the Israelis are continuing to block the main crossings into the Gaza Strip?
To start with, the Kamal Udwan Hospital announced that at least 15 children were dead because of dehydration and hunger. It is already famine and starvation that is hitting people who are living in northern Gaza. They have very limited supplies, if any, and they have been struggling for the sake of accessing anything. The American support that was airdropped on the people suffices around 56,000 individuals if they were accessed. Some of the airdrop humanitarian aid was taken or drifted by the wind towards the Israeli side. The people could not access that. Some of the areas are extremely unsafe. Palestinians, when they are going into those areas, they might be targeted and killed. And the paradoxical thing and paradoxical fact that Palestinians have been speaking of for such a very long time, American C-103 plane is dropping food, American F-16, F-22, F-35, American-made weapons are dropped on the people of Gaza. So into Palestinian consciousness now and the people awareness, America is sending them arms and killing and death and sending them food at the very same time. Palestinians are still struggling and they're not likely to be saved by such unorganized way of dropping food onto them. They want, according to the Palestinians, according to those who are affected by the ongoing bombardment and disaster, they want the border to be open, they want regular access of the food, they want to live in peace, safety and security, but that does not seem to be happening anytime soon.
Akram al-Sashri in Rafah. The Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said humanitarian aid must be sent into Gaza immediately. The comments came on the final day of an annual diplomacy forum. He also called for a ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine, saying that he hopes they can happen soon. Our correspondent Michal Bardavid reports from Istanbul.
The final day of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum covered a wide range of issues: women in diplomacy, climate change and education. But across the 3 days, the central issues shaping discussions were the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's opening remarks underscored Ankara's overall stance on Gaza, criticizing the international community's inaction. However, there remains some optimism among diplomats for a ceasefire before Ramadan on March 10th. In his closing speech, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan stressed the importance of collective action to address what he said were double standards and international law violations, calling for urgent aid to be sent into Gaza. Fidan's appeal coincided with the U.S.'s first humanitarian aid airdrop carried out by 3 military planes. Fidan also expressed some hope that talks of a ceasefire in Ukraine could begin soon. But a leaked audio recording of German officials discussing weapons for Ukraine caused a stir on Saturday. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who attended the forum in Antalya, stated that the recording published by Russian media exposed what he called the cunning plans of German forces. The recording has triggered concerns of espionage in Germany and is being investigated. I'm Michal Bardavid for CGTN in Istanbul.
The death toll from a Russian drone attack in the Ukrainian city of Odessa has risen to 10 after the bodies of a mother and a baby were found in the rubble. The drone crashed into a residential building on Saturday. 2 other children are among the dead, and a day of mourning has been declared in the city. Following the attack, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky blamed delays in the delivery of air defense systems to his country. China says it's willing to continue promoting peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Special Representative for Eurasian Affairs Li Hui made the comments during talks with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin. It's Li's second trip to Europe for talks on the Ukraine crisis, which also includes visits to Poland, Ukraine and Germany. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow.
Well, we do know that Moscow highly appreciates Chinese efforts to bring the negotiated settlements and for the shuttle diplomacy when it comes to the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Ministry stressed in the statements following the meeting between Galuzin and Li Hui that Moscow would not accept any settlement of the Ukrainian conflict without Moscow's participation, and said that any sort of dialogue platform initiated by the West and not taking into account the Russian interests is only aggravating the situation and escalating the tension. Having said that, Moscow also believes that a negotiated solution is possible, but of course Moscow has been saying before that the realities on the ground should be taken into account. We also have heard the Russian Foreign Ministry saying that it's cherishes the relationship with China, with Beijing, saying that this year the relations mark the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic ties between the two. Judging from what we have heard from the Chinese side, from the statement released by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Moscow agreed that a negotiated solution is one of the most viable options. The Chinese side also noted that the conflict is already lasting for over 2 years, and the experience of the international relations shows that any conflict, the more complicated it is, requires more effort in terms of political settlement. So as we understand at this stage, Moscow is believing that the solution to the crisis through the diplomatic means is possible. But again, you have to remember the Russian position here, which suggests that Ukraine itself has forbidden the opportunity of starting the negotiations with Moscow. So certainly this round of shuttle diplomacy has been highly valued here in Moscow. But again, we are yet to see any progress when it comes to the situation on the ground and whether Moscow will be willing to give up its military effort in Ukraine. Because what the Russian politicians have been saying for months now is that they, one way or another, they will be aiming to achieve the goals of what they describe here as the special military operation in Ukraine.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. You're watching CGTN, still ahead. Back in office for a second time, Pakistan's parliament elects Shehbaz Sharif as Prime Minister.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Strengthening the foundation for a future powered by innovation, where high technology, high efficiency, and high quality converge. These 3 pillars are set to propel China's new productive forces and supercharge the Chinese economy into a new era of development, new industries, new models, and new growth momentum. Join CGTN as we guide you through the new productive forces poised to redefine the Chinese economy.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. A Hamas delegation waits in Cairo following reports that Israel is staying away from ceasefire talks amid wrangling over hostage details. China says it stands ready to promote peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine during talks in Moscow. China's top political advisory body has held a news conference centred on the country's economy. It comes a day ahead of its annual session when the country's top political advisers meet in Beijing for their 6-day gathering. The National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference advises the government on key policy measures, including many social and political issues. While the two sessions will see China's leaders finalise goals for the year ahead, the meetings are major events on the political calendar. But how do they work exactly? Our correspondent Michael Marilia explains.
Think of China's leadership like a coaching team. They need to come up with a game plan for running the economy. They work on that plan during two meetings, the two sessions. There's the NPC, or National People's Congress. This is essentially China's version of a parliament and acts like the head coach, approving all the big decisions. Nearly 3,000 people attend the meeting. They're known as deputies, and they represent the people, selecting the government and checking all its tactics. China has admitted there's a need for more female representation, but there's some way to go. Right now, about a quarter of NPC delegates are women. Nearly 15% of delegates are from ethnic minority groups, even though minorities make up just 9% of the population. Then there's the Political Consultative Conference. Just over 2,000 people gather to debate ideas and proposals. They represent groups not directly linked to the Communist Party. Many are business people in some of China's key sectors. This conference does not pass laws. It's an advisory body, almost like an assistant coach. Now, these two groups will focus on the strategy for the year ahead. They'll discuss a range of issues, but China's leaders have already said economic growth is key. That will be one of the biggest goals in 2024. And if the two sessions are on target, well, that could be a win for the Chinese people.
Michael Marilia. In other news, Shehbaz Sharif has become Pakistan's Prime Minister for a second time. It comes nearly a month after an inconclusive general election, which was marred by delays and allegations of vote rigging. Sharif secured 201 votes in the 336-member National Assembly. Our correspondent Daniel Khan reports from Islamabad.
In a decisive vote, Shehbaz Sharif secures a second term as Pakistan's Prime Minister with 201 votes, defeating opponent Umar Ayub Khan, who received 92 votes. The National Assembly session faced disruptions as supporters of imprisoned PTI founder Imran Khan clashed with allies of Shehbaz Sharif. Caretaker PM Anwarul Haq Kakar is set to welcome Shehbaz to the Prime Minister House on Monday, with preparations for a guard of honour underway. Ahead of the prime ministerial vote, the PTI also held nationwide protests on Saturday, alleging electoral rigging on February 8th. In Punjab's capital, PTI supporters gathered, leading to clashes with police. Several leaders were also detained. PTI loyalists voiced concerns about electoral integrity, demanding justice and the release of party members, including PTI chairman Imran Khan, from what they call illegal detention. The incoming government faces significant economic hurdles, including soaring inflation, unemployment, potential negotiations for a new IMF loan to address balance of payment issues, debt restructuring, and overseeing the privatization of financially struggling state-owned entities. Experts say leading a coalition government will add an additional layer of challenges for the incoming Prime Minister. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Islamabad.
Donald Trump has taken another big step towards the US Republican presidential nomination with a string of comprehensive victories. The former president celebrated comfortable wins in the Missouri, Michigan and Idaho caucuses, continuing his clean sweep of states so far. The results give Trump 247 Republican delegates, compared to his last remaining challenger, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who has just 24. Armed groups have stormed Haiti's main prison in the capital, Port-au-Prince, in an escalation of the latest wave of violence. Some reports say hundreds of inmates have escaped. Police issued an urgent appeal for help following days of fighting as a major gang leader seeks to topple the Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, who's in Kenya discussing security assistance. Now, every year, Europe produces around 3.5 million tonnes of used vehicle tyres. These days, around 40% are burned for energy production, while around half are recycled for other purposes. But the numbers vary between countries, and in some places, the dumping of used tyres remains a problem. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports from Hungary.
Cars are only as safe as the rubber that connects them to the road. For vehicle owners, replacing old tires is routine, but what happens next can potentially harm the environment.
For many years, people discarded tires in our forests, abandoned industrial sites, and anywhere they could, causing a serious problem.
Gabor File has been a tire recycling specialist in Hungary for 30 years. He says vehicle tires are often overlooked in the push to decarbonize transport.
€10 per season. Okay, per season, yeah.
Since July of last year, we've implemented a new system in Hungary, and it's slowly gaining acceptance. We've set up tire containers in various cities and are actively educating the public on the proper way to dispose of their used tires.
Tire recycling bins like this ones have reduced illegal dumping, but experts say more needs to be done, as only 60% of car tires are recycled every year in Hungary.
Sculptor Gabor Barat has found inspiration in an unlikely place. In recent years, he has crafted hundreds of sculptures from tires using his art to raise awareness about pollution.
Many car owners don't know how to get rid of old tires, causing environmental problems. My artwork tackles just a part of the tire waste issue. I've also set up tire collection campaigns along the Danube and in our forests to make a bigger impact.
Since a collection system was first set up in Hungary, nearly 60,000 tires have been recycled or repurposed using various methods.
In Hungary, we have a few tire recycling methods. One involves grinding tires into steel, rubber and fabric. We're also using newer technology like pyrolysis, which breaks down rubber into carbon black, gas, oil and other chemicals. The oils can be used as fuel.
So if governments in Europe want to fully decarbonize their roads, they'll have to find a way to turn the tire industry into a circular economy. Pablo Gutierrez, Pech, Hungary.
Our headlines again here on CGTN. A Hamas delegation waits in Cairo following reports that Israel is staying away from ceasefire talks amid wrangling over hostage details. China says it stands ready to promote peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine during talks in Moscow. And Shehbaz Sharif is sworn in as Pakistan's Prime Minister for a second time after last month's controversial election. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or you can scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, though, it's Razor. For now, from all the team in London, goodbye.